Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. In today's class, we are looking at variables and data types. By the end of the class, we should understand what variables are. We'll also look at the different data types that we have. We'll look at how to declare variables and how to assign values to them. Let's find out what a variable is. A variable is simply defined as a portion of memory to store value. What does this even mean? Think of it this way. As a computer programmer, you will mainly be dealing with data. It's either you are asking your users to provide data for you, or you are generating some data from the manipulations that you do. When you receive this data, it is very important that you store it somewhere for future use. How do you do this? You can request your computer to save some portion of its memory and where you would use as a container. This container that is used to store the value is what we are referring to as a variable. Let us think of it this way. Assuming that you have sugar and salt in your kitchen and you have containers that are similar to store this sugar and salt, what do you think will happen? Most likely, after pouring them into the container, once you come back to it again, you will be confused which one is sugar and which one is salt. How would you usually solve this? By putting a label around the container, so that you know which is sugar and then which is salt. Same idea is used in programming. Because different programs have requested a computer to save portion of memory for them, the computer may also be confused when you ask for your data back. Which data are you referring to? Which data in which container? For you to easily identify which container you are talking about, you need to give each container a name. So, the container is what we are referring to as a variable. The name that is given to the container or the label that you put around the container is what we are referring to as a variable name or an identifier. So, if you hear of an identifier or a variable name, it's simply the name or the label that you put around your container, so that you can easily refer to them when you need it. When you are choosing your variable names can be a sequence of one or more letters, digits, or underscore. What this means is that you cannot use anything outside of what has been listed. Your variable names should start with a letter. Then it can be followed by a number or an underscore or even another letter. Variable names should not be similar to keywords. Keywords are just words that have special meanings to the computer. Let's think of it this way. Let's say you just made money. You bought your dream car, and then you visited the licensing office and said you wanted GP1. Do you think you'll be given this number? No. Why? Because in Ghana, GP1 is reserved for Ghana police. So no matter how much money you have, GP1 would not be given to you. Similar idea when it comes to programming. There are some words that have special meanings to the compiler, and so you cannot select them as your variable name or identifier. Now, let's talk about data types. What is a data type? Think of it this way. The data that you use as a programmer consists of different categories. Some of them are numbers, some of them are characters, some of them are Boolean values, and even within the numbers, some are whole numbers, whilst others are numbers with decimal points behind them. So, because there are different categories that you need to deal with, you need to find the appropriate container. Let's discuss a scenario. Assuming you want to go and buy a container to store an item, what would you first think of? You think of the kind of item that you are going to store so that you can buy the most appropriate container. If you are going to store onions, you buy a basket. But if you want to store water, you buy a bottle. Okay, now let's come back to programming. Because you have different categories of data, you need to be able to inform your compiler what kind of data you intend to store in your variable. This would let the compiler be able to select the right type of container for you, so that if you intend, for instance, to store water, your compiler will not give you a basket. Let's talk about integer data types. Integer data types are used to handle numbers, whole numbers. There are different subcategories of the integer data type. Typically, you will use int to represent integer values, but there is short. Short is usually smaller than int. Then we have an unsigned int. Unsigned int is used for non-negative whole numbers. So whenever you use unsigned int, it means that nobody can use a negative whole number. It's either positive whole numbers or 0. Long is bigger than int. In some places, it takes up to about 8 bytes. Then we have the unsigned long. Just as we saw in the unsigned int, these are very large values, but they can only hold positive values. In order for you to declare a variable as an integer, what you need to do is to state the data type. So for instance, I will type int followed by the name of the variable. So in this case, int value is the name of the variable. And after declaring the variable, you can also assign a value to it. How do you assign a value to it? By bringing the assignment operator or the equal sign and then the value that you want to assign to it. So in simple terms, if you want to declare a variable, use the name of the data type, the name of the variable. You can end there, or if you want to go ahead and assign a value to it, you bring the equal sign and then the value. How do you output values in a variable? You output values in a variable using the cout command. So you bring cout and then the insertion operator, then the name of the variable. So in this case, you can see that we have cout. This int you see here is just a text, and then this is the name of our variable, and this function here is just to go to a new line. Alright, at this point, let's talk about floating point data type. Floating point data type are used to represent numbers with decimal points behind them. We have floats, double, and long double. Any of these can be used to represent floating point numbers or numbers with data with decimals behind them. What is the difference between these three categories? Float is used to store very small decimal numbers. So for instance, if I want to store a number like the score of a student, it is possible to have decimal points behind it, but this will not be too huge, right? And so I can use float. But when it comes to numbers like your bank balance can be really huge, and so I can either use a double or a long double to save that. Again, in the slide that you see, we are declaring the variable by stating the data type and then the name of the variable. And then what you see, the code you see at the bottom here, just depicts how we are displaying the value that we assigned to the variable. Character data types are data types that represent single characters. So for instance, if you have any single character, that is any character that you see on the keyboard, just a single character, and you want to store, then you have to use a variable of the data type char. Boolean data types are used to hold true or false. They can only hold two possible values, either true or false. So, this brings us to the end of today's class. Do not forget to subscribe and follow this channel. Thank you.